Everyone. You'll have to bear with me here for a second. Okay, it's on. There we go. I have a slideshow here that I want to pull up to bookend our conversation from yesterday. As you may or may not realize, the conversation was very vibrant in here, and that is why I love doing this. Again, I'll show you a slide at the end here where we'll have all the material ready in terms of the slide decks and the resources that we talked about. But ultimately, you are here with people from around the country who are in similar positions, and that's what I want to capitalize on in these opportunities. Because we're in this together, we're doing this work together, we can learn from one another, and that is ultimately what I love to do, is to facilitate that discussion. So in saying that, I do want to say thank you to Hannah and Jake and Bill for just kind of stewarding me into the right place at the right time. And their graciousness and hospitality is warmly welcome. So thank you to the three of you specifically. To bookend what we talked about yesterday, I shared this quote from Martin Luther, and he said, "If you preach the gospel in all aspects with the exception of the issues which deal specifically with your time, you are not preaching the gospel at all." And I think that resonates here because we are dealing with some very significant issues, specifically in terms of the way we communicate to our parishioners, to each other, to the world around us. And so that's kind of what we dug into yesterday. I also talked about the online presence matrix and basically dissecting in a very clinical manner what all encompasses a church's online presence. So you have three main components: web, blog, social media. And I want to point out that it is never this clear in terms of distinction, ever. Oftentimes it's just a mix of the three kind of in one giant blob. But for sake of clarity and for sake of making sure that we all know what we're talking about, I separate them. And actually I'm considering adding a fourth one, that being email. The more and more I talk to churches and research email marketing, I'm just realizing how important it is to the life of online communities and getting the word out that way. And then I also wanted to throw this statistic in front of you. This is, the graphic here is from Network for Good. They measure these sorts of things. And it basically is comparing quarter 1, 2011 to quarter 1, 2002. Or I'm sorry, 2010. Year over year, where are the donations coming from? Online giving. Or overall giving, rather. So as you can see, overall giving was up 23%. But the only area that showed growth was social giving. And that simply means calls to action made through social networks. That's the only area in overall giving that saw an increase from 2010 to 2011. And I'm still kind of puzzled why they chose to use green for the down arrow. But that's just kind of how they must do things, I suppose. So it's very important, and these things are excluding disaster relief donations. So I believe in this time frame, as I was reading this article, it's been a while now, but I believe the Haiti earthquake kind of hit during the time that they were measuring this. So they took all that and said, we're going to set this aside. If it wasn't the Haiti earthquake, there was a large natural disaster. I can't remember which one. But they were saying charity websites, generic, charity websites branded, and portal giving all showed decrease. And again, social giving was the only one that saw an increase. So I thought that was interesting, especially given our conversation yesterday where we talked about young people, millennials, the millennial generation, people born from 1980 to 2004, the ones who are able to give will only mostly do so in an online capacity. So we talked about new media values. We made it through one new media value yesterday, interactivity. And so I do want to say we're going to try and get through the rest of them. There is 5 total. And that may or may not happen, and I'm totally okay with that. Again, I'll have these slides available to you And the next new media value is personalization. And again, I think it's important to reiterate that the goal here is to not assign a value judgment to these specific values. In other words, our goal is to observe and simply see what's going on with our visible eye. To basically say, what are we seeing, what are we observing, and then as objectively as possible, describe it. Because these are the values mindset that many young people under the age of 30 operate under. Now, it's not isolated there. There are many, many people over the age of 30 who have these values. But the point is that there is a bridge, there's a very specific window happening right now between digital natives and digital immigrants, where people who are 21 right now are completely digitally native. They do not understand a world where you can't do the types of things that we're talking about. So those people are buying alcohol. They've been able to vote for 3 years. This is a significant indicator of where our culture is headed. So new media value number 2, personalization. Jock Rock Volume 1. Does anybody have that CD? One person. That was the very first CD I ever bought with my own money. Jock Rock was kind of this album put out by ESPN that had a bunch of sports anthems on it. Blitzkrieg Bop was on there. Yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up. There's some other things. Chris Berman was all over this CD. And I remember it was the first CD that I bought because I remember thinking how cool CDs or compact discs were. And of course, when you bought an album on CD, you had to buy the entire thing. You couldn't pick and choose, and typically, in most cases, there's usually 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 songs that you liked on an album, and the rest you just kind of skipped over. That was, of course, the magic of CD technology, was that you could skip over songs. And the reason I bring this up is because I cannot tell you the last time that I bought an album on CD, much less a full album. Because, of course, we all have access to iTunes, where we can pick and choose the songs that we want, the songs that we like, the songs that we don't like. Of course, they're incentivizing us to buy entire albums by saying, you can have this exclusive content or that exclusive content. But most of us will either buy a single that we like or maybe a few songs off the album. If they're our favorite artists or we really enjoy them, we may buy the whole album. But typically now, our music buying experience is highly personalized to our own tastes. And in doing so, it's actually changing the music industry. So the way that artists write songs now is being altered because of iTunes. Because record labels know that they can't just put 3 or 4 good songs on a CD and force people to buy the whole thing. You actually have to come up with something that has value and is valuable. So it's changing the way that artists write songs, and it's changing the way that record labels market these albums, all because of iTunes. In dealing with, in a church context, we're dealing with people who come to our churches with this mindset of picking and choosing, of personalizing, being able to customize pretty much every experience of their life. We see this with DVR, with Netflix, with Hulu. My wife and I, we cut our cable when we got married, and we haven't really ever missed it. There's a few moments where, during college football season, there'll be a game out of market that I can't watch. But most often, we're, at the end of the day, we're watching shows that air, on a very different night, but we're able to see it through Netflix or through Hulu. And because of that, network TV executives are paying attention to this. And so they're trying to pack as much as they can into what they call the second screen experience. So basically, you watch television, and how many of us do this, where we have either our smartphone or an iPad tablet or some sort of tablet computer or maybe our laptop that we're watching as we watch television. This experience is very, very common. And in fact, Nielsen, the TV ratings measurement organization, has teamed up with Twitter to create this, I don't know officially what they're calling it, but it's a Twitter TV metric. So Nielsen is now baking in tweets per show into their television measurement totals. So basically that's how they're measuring the popularity of a show. It's why when you watch television, you see in the bottom right-hand corner, you always see a hashtag most often. You know, The Voice or Bachelor. I am an unashamed fan of The Bachelor. And you better believe that my wife and I have the second screen experience going on during The Bachelor. Because people are really funny. And what's even more interesting is that, so for The Bachelor, for instance, Sean and Catherine are tweeting as they're watching the show along with us. And so it adds this whole entire other dimension to watching television. When you're watching a show with somebody on it and they're commenting, it's like watching a DVD commentary of a director, going through his film and watching it. It's fantastic. And so now marketers are now saying, actually the second screen is where the action is at, and the TV is supplementary. And so think of how this applies to when people come to our church services and they are asked to sit straightforward and listen to one person talk for 60, sometimes 75 minutes. It's very, very difficult. It's becoming more difficult. I saw this in the youth ministry that I was a part of at Hope. The glowing screen phenomenon, right? Where you are speaking to an audience and you know that they may or may not be paying attention to you because their attention is focused on a mobile phone or on an iPad. Now there are arguments for and against this, obviously. There is I think an inherent danger to creating a society where we're always looking at a device, right? And we'll talk about that this morning. But again, the goal here is not to assign a value judgment. It's just to say, this is where we're at. And we need to do ministry within this context. So the concern that a lot of people will have in this instance is that, especially in a religious context or in a Christian context, is when we apply personalization to spirituality, some people will make the argument that you can get into some very dangerous territory where people will pick and choose what applies to them and what does not. So they'll essentially try and tailor or personalize their own faith experience. And you have various groups saying, well, we have to take the entirety of Scripture. We can't just pick and choose what parts that we want. Other parts will say, we need to contextualize the gospel for where we're at now. And to which I say, to both sides, human beings have always been picking and choosing in terms of their spirituality. Always. We need to look at the Thomas Jefferson Bible, right? Everybody knows the story about Thomas Jefferson and how he essentially cut out parts of Scripture that dealt with the miraculous or kind of the out of the ordinary. And Jefferson took a very rationalistic approach towards his faith. So we've always kind of been dealing with this this phenomenon. And so it's not new to our context here in terms of new media. It's just applied in a different way. I want to show you, this is the first page of results for podcasts when you go to the Christianity category in iTunes. And I couldn't even fit the first page onto the screen. And this is just the popular ones. You can see at the top here goes A through Z. And this isn't we're not even in the A's yet. Like, this is just one page of popular results. And so what this is telling us is through personalization, we can go onto iTunes, let's say, and listen to people preach sermons in contexts that are very different than ours. And for the record, I believe that this is a good thing, where we have the ability to be exposed to voices and expressions of the gospel that look entirely different from ours. And, the nature of the church changes when knowledge is no longer a commodity. And what I mean by that is, again, going to something simple like an iTunes podcast where you can download sermons from, churches all over the world, really. When that is no longer a barrier, when that's no longer an issue, the church has to take on a different meaning. It has to embrace a different role in society. because it's no longer the keeper of knowledge, the keeper of Scripture, when people can have access to that anywhere, anytime that they please, from any corner of the globe. Exposure to different voices and cultures and expressions of the gospel, in other words, personalizing our faith, is a good thing. I want to show you a few examples of how churches are practicing this and what it means. This is a picture from the Village Church in Flower Mound, Texas. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because they are leveraging social media to give people a picture into their congregation that they normally might not see. This is a very large congregation, a lot of people. Matt Chandler is the pastor. He's a very well-known speaker on the evangelical kind of speaking circuit. And this picture is actually from an elder-led prayer meeting that many of the members do not get to see. You can see there's quite a few people there, but this is an elder-led prayer meeting, and they've chosen to give people in their congregation a picture into that using Instagram. And you can't see the numbers here, but this has just under 300 likes, and 2 people have shared it. And this was, I took the screen cap about 8 hours after they posted it. And so where I'm going with this is that people want to have an inside perspective into the life of a church. And that really resonates with a lot of people. In other words, it helps them to bridge the gap between us and them, between church staff and between parishioners. Here's another picture of a new prayer wall that they were putting up. And this was actually taken halfway through the process. They went on to actually paint these. They're kind of like wood slats, wood panels, which I'm thinking, that's gorgeous in and of itself. Why would you paint it? But anyway, they wanted to show people the process of what they were doing inside the church. So it's a very small example, but it helps people who are part of that community, see what's going on during the 6 other days of the week when they're not there. In other words, it personalizes their experience with their congregation. And this, for the record, is a good thing. It creates engagement, it creates community, it helps break down that barrier between what people don't see, again, during the 6 days of the week from what they do see on a Sunday or Saturday, let's say. It shortens the gap between us and them. This is a picture from hopeonline.tv, and this is actually from the Easter service that happened not too long ago. And what's interesting is that this is a tweet actually from Argentina, a viewer from Argentina. And they took a picture of their laptop, of them watching their laptop, obviously, and they wrote, "Hi, Mike Householder and Hope West Des Moines. Thankful to be able to watch this online in Buenos Aires today. Happy Easter." So, again, this person in Buenos Aires, Britt is her name. She feels a connection to that church even when she is thousands and thousands of miles away. It personalizes that connection for her. I also want you to do something for me, a little favor. If you are on Twitter, Mike Householder will get such a kick out of this if we all do this together. But I want you to tweet Mike. Just say something along the lines of, "Hey, Justin says hello, and we're watching you right now," or something like that. Something that will totally creep him out. But I show you this, and I was texting with him yesterday because he's a huge fan of In-N-Out Burger, and we don't have those in Iowa. So I texted a pic of my double animal style and sent it to him. Before and after, so basically saying, I'm here, you're not. So anyway, the reason I show you this other than to actually send him a tweet or two is because I wanted to show you what his Twitter profile looks like. And if you probably can't see it, but he has gone crazy with Twitter. And remember, I don't know if you remember, but I told you about Mike on our first day together, who was vehemently opposed to social media. And I knew at the time, so I reserved this Twitter handle for him probably about 4 years ago. Because I thought there's going to come a day where he will want to use this, and I'm going to be the one to hand him the keys. So about, I would say 6 months ago, I got an email from Mike saying, "I want to try out Twitter." And I said, "Here, Mike, here are the keys to your handle." And so he has just gone berserk with Twitter. And what's interesting is that Here's a pastor of a 10,000 member church. Yet he is able to shorten that gap and speak to people on a one-to-one level. Now, it may not be face-to-face, it may not be person-to-person, but I will tell you that when he replies to people on an individual basis, it means something to those parishioners. It means something to them. It creates and facilitates and supplements a relationship with him in a very small way, but it creates a communal feel and helps people feel like, this is my church, that's my pastor. He's communicating with me. I know from his experience on Facebook, when he communicates and wishes a parishioner happy birthday, that means something to them. And so again, it personalizes their experience with the church, and it allows him on a very small way to interact with parishioners on a one-to-one level. This is a big deal. This is huge. And I believe that as we move forward, this will be a necessity for people in leadership in some capacity to be embracing social media in this sense. And there are whole other discussions that need to evolve around when and how and what, but the mindset ultimately is we need to be connecting. The gospel is transmitted along relational lines, Alan Hirsch says. And so as we're able to extend those relational lines using social media, the gospel goes forth. Next thing I want to cover is new media value number 3, ubiquity. And the first tagline here, OREO. So what does that mean? I want to show you an ad from Oreo. Anybody see this? Yeah. So this ad, if you were watching the Super Bowl this year, this ad went, as they say, it went viral on Twitter and on Facebook. And there's a reason for that. Now on the surface, this looks like any other ad. In fact, without any context, it may just seem nonsensical. What does this mean? You can still dunk in the dark. What does that even mean? Well, if you were watching the Super Bowl, you know that for about 45 minutes, the lights went out. Or at least half of them did in the stadium. And so Oreo capitalized on this moment, put together an ad that looked, this ad, and sent it out into the social media world, into the social media pool, into the ether. And people went crazy for it. Not because it has particular artistic merit. I mean, it's not the most gorgeous ad that you'll ever see. But because a national brand was able to mobilize and move as quickly as they did. And it resonated with people in a way that I'm not sure that we still understand yet. But I think this was the world's introduction to real-time marketing. That's a term that's evolving and emerging. And I think it has implications for our churches as well, this real-time marketing. But I want to read to you an interview with the marketing director of 360i, who is the ad agency that was responsible for this ad. So Oreo hires 360i. Actually, one of my friends, she used to live in Des Moines. Now she lives in Brooklyn and works at 360i. She's actually on the team here and helped create this ad. But one of her coworkers, Sarah Hofstetter, said, it was easy to get approvals from the Oreo execs and get this ad up in minutes. She said, you need to have a brave brand to approve content that quickly. When all of the stakeholders come together so quickly, you've got magic. And then she says in one of my favorite parts of the interview, what happens when everything changes and you go off script? That was where it got fun. So Oreo was at the ready during the Super Bowl. 360i was able to communicate with them very quickly and say, hey, this is what we want to do. Are you guys on board with that? Oreo says yes. Within minutes, they have this ad out. And the results, I will tell you, the reach of this one ad went way farther than any commercial that you or I saw. And not only to mention that after the Super Bowl was over, news stories emerged. Networks like CNN and Fox News, they did stories on this ad and how people went berserk for it. So they got the TV exposure and they got the social media exposure because they were able to move quickly and have the decision makers in the room to operate in an efficient manner. And I want to say, working with churches large and small, we have a lot to learn from the National Biscuit Company, from Nabisco. We have a lot to learn. That if a cookie company can do this, Churches need to figure out a way to do this and operate in a faster, more efficient manner, and to be able to think on the fly and change their thinking and change strategies quickly. And I use these examples to show that it can be done. Nabisco has a budget bigger than any church that any of us have ever been a part of, bigger than any denomination, and yet they were able to move this quickly. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. I was talking with Jake this morning over breakfast, and we were talking about if some of the strategies, let's say, Oreo was using to generate income and sales and brand awareness, if those strategies weren't working, they would change pretty quickly. They would change almost, I don't want to say overnight, but people would say, hey, what's our bottom line? What we're doing is not working. We need to change it and adapt. And again, this isn't meant to, I think this is, if anything, this is a sign of encouragement for churches to say this can be done. And you don't have to have the big budgets. You can move and think, and I'll get into this in a little bit of how to actually go about starting that process. But I just really enjoyed this because it allowed Oreo to be present in very many places at once, all because they were able to move quickly. The next one I want to show you is the smartwatch. Ubiquity. Technology is becoming embedded, everywhere. There's not a place where we can go and not experience social technology in some way, shape, or form. In fact, on my wrist here, you may have noticed this is a Nike Fuel Band. It's tracking my movement throughout the day. And at the end of the day, I sync it with my phone, and it shares the results with my social networks. Now, some people get irritated by it. I had one guy tell me, I don't care how many steps you take in a day. I say, well, you can unfollow me if you'd like. I don't know if he was serious or not, but anyway, the point is, the smartwatch, you may have heard rumors of, Apple's building a smartwatch and all these other tech companies are building a smartwatch that syncs with our phones. And there are some smartwatches in place already. One's the Pebble. It was funded on Kickstarter not too long ago. But social technology, wearable technology, is becoming embedded into everything that we do. And I shared this stat yesterday, but by the year 2015, there will be no spot on the planet where you cannot receive a data or Wi-Fi signal, either through cell towers or satellite Wi-Fi signals. And that includes like the air, right? So when we're in airplanes, we can get Wi-Fi, which is just mind-blowing if you think about it. There's a signal being beamed from the ground into space back down to a metal tube that's going 500 miles an hour. And I'm able to tweet people about that. That is mind-blowing to me. And that sort of thing is becoming common stance for us in the here and now. The picture I want to show you next is, I discussed this briefly yesterday. This is from Katine. It is a northeast Ugandan village. And what you see here is a bunch of people in this village huddled around a power strip. You can see this down in the lower corner here. And they have this power. They have power for about 2 hours a day. And this power adapter is hooked up to a car battery. So like I said, they have about 2 hours per day where people can huddle around and charge their various devices. But as you can see, most of them are smartphones. And what this tells us is that, even in remote villages like Katine, where I shared that the neighboring village doesn't even have access to clean drinking water, there are parts of the world that are leapfrogging the desktop. So basically, they're going from nothing straight into mobile. And our culture is becoming more and more mobile. And in one of the sessions I was sitting in yesterday, she talked about, Lindsay was her name, she talked about the importance of mobile. And, we're in a post-website world now. I know that may be kind of discouraging for some of us to hear, but most people will come into contact with our organization through a social network, not our website. So we need to operate under the assumption that, when I was at Monk as a staff member, we had just started getting requests for people to design websites for mobile first and then desktop. So kind of the framework of reference for where people were coming into contact with websites was changing. So basically where people were saying, we want to put the priority on mobile, not on desktop. And that switch has just been happening, I would say, in the last 1 to 2 years. But again, some of us, may just want to leap right into that kind of this mobile revolution of saying, listen, we've been messing around and trying to get our desktop website off the ground, but it may be if that struggle is becoming too great, it may be best to just say, let's go for mobile first, because we're becoming a mobile-dominated society. It's where most people will come into contact with us as an organization. The next one I want to show you is Google Glass. Has anyone seen this, familiar with the concept, Google Glass? Okay, most of us are at least somewhat aware. And I grabbed this picture because I can't tell if she's enjoying this or if she's being tortured. And part of me also thinks about this guy. Like that's immediately where my mind goes, is LeVar Burton wearing that goofy kind of space visor thing. Anyway, Google Glass, if you're not familiar, is basically a wearable, like you would wear glasses, and it shows data in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Now, you can't go out and buy these yet. They're in beta testing right now. In fact, there was 8,000 applicants. They chose 8,000 applicants from a pool of like millions to beta test this. And they get to pay $1,500 to beta test it. So there you go. But what this is, where we're transitioning is basically Google Glass can intake data from around you and tell you things about the world that you're seeing on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So it's a step in a direction of basically saying we are again further blurring the lines between online and offline. They're almost becoming one and the same. You hear the term augmented reality. If you have your Yelp phone app, they have something called Monocle, where I could stand here, pull up my phone, and turn the camera on, and Yelp would tell me where are the restaurants around here, what are they rated, how much does the food in the restaurant cost, all from holding up my phone. And you're seeing more and more of this, where our phones, our mobile devices, can actually serve as a portal and tell us about the world around us. In fact, Drew, the CEO of Monk, he believes that there'll be a time where, like with Google Glass, you won't even need to remember people's names. Truly. I did not expect that to go over that well. But through technology, we could look around the room and I could know each and every one of your names if I chose to want to know that. Through a lot of different ways, our mobile devices can kind of send out a signal, and a receptor like Google Glass can pick that up and show it, basically say, hey, here's your name, where you live, these types of things. Of course, you'd be able to control that through privacy, but this is the kind of stuff that energizes me and gets me going. But all that to say, technology is all around us, and that pace will quicken. And so imagine if these folks are sitting in our congregations on a weekend, and they're listening to a sermon, and their technology, whether through a mobile device or Google Glass, is fact-checking our sermon as we're going. I don't think that's too far off. I really don't. Where, let's say we're using a Greek verb or noun or Greek word, and their device is able to parse it for them on the fly. Basically show them, hey, here's the Strong's Concordance of where this word appears, and here's what it means, and this person's using it out of context, which is another discussion that we don't want to get into. But anyway, this is Google Glass, and my favorite version of Google Glass is this one, Google Glass for the poor man. Which, if you can't tell, it's eyeglasses with an iPhone taped to the front of it. Now that I will pay money for. But of course, ubiquity, the humor of this is we all kind of sense and know and understand this. We sense it intuitively and inherently, and we know it to be true. The next new media value I'm going to cover is connectedness. I was late last night when I was editing these, and what's interesting is that the concerns that we talked about yesterday, like this is why I love being in these types of groups and settings, is because I can alter and change things depending on where the group is at. So it was pretty late last night when I was doing this particular slide, so maybe that's why I chose the verbiage that I did. But anyway, this I want to show you is a picture of St. Peter's Square in 2005 for the announcement of Pope Benedict. And many of us have probably seen these pictures and know where this is headed. But the next screen I want to show you is from the 2013 announcement of Pope Francis. And here they are side by side to compare them to one another. So what does this tell us? Revolution, yeah. People are connected and wired in a way that they weren't just 7 short years ago. And yes, yeah. Scary. Scary, isn't it? I mean, you can see, this is kind of a humorous way to say this, but we know that this has huge implications for churches. When people are connected 24/7, and this is ultimately where I'm going. We are, the church's role in culture is necessarily changing from having knowledge as a commodity to a community gatherer, or a point of kind of mobilizing, or a hub for people, rather than sole, I guess you could say, sole possessors of the truth. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but I wanted to just say that here because, this is such a stark contrast, again, from just 7 short years ago, of where people are at and how many of us have access to devices, in our pockets or in our backpacks at any moment's notice. Connectedness, the next one I want to show you, black and yellow. This is from, I am a devoted Iowa Hawkeyes fan. Yes, we have another one, 2 other ones in the room. And what was really fascinating to me was I went to a game not too long ago with my brother and my dad, and we went to the Iowa-Michigan game. And it was really fascinating to see the attire of everyone that day. So we went and we saw, that certain sections were wearing black and certain sections were wearing gold. And it went this way all the way across the stadium. And I got to thinking, I didn't get the memo. How did they figure all this out? And I did a little research and went onto their Facebook fan page, and I saw this post. It says, color reminders for this Saturday's game. Even sections were gold, odd sections were black, UI students were black. And I did a little more digging and came to find out that this and their email list was the only way that they coordinated what you see here. This is an aerial shot, obviously, of that game. And it was staggering to me to see how something like Facebook and email could coordinate something like this. And that was the only way that they got the word out. That's it. And so, I don't know, you guys probably can't see this either, but if you see at this particular moment, it was posted 47 minutes when I took this screen cap. 47 minutes. They had posted it 47 minutes ago. There was 417 likes and 62 shares. And of course, each one of those means that the people who liked or shared it, it went to their networks, and so on and so forth. And this is the many-to-many that we were talking about on the first day. And this is how movements spread. This is how people connect and network using social technology. And it has real-world results. We see this again in countries like Iran and Egypt, where people are using social media to network and overthrow, in some cases, oppressive governments who have been in place for decades. That's real-world stuff. And as churches, I believe we have a responsibility to understand how to harness that and use it to build the kingdom and further the kingdom, further the work of the kingdom. Last thing in connectedness, and I believe that the church has a very unique opportunity in this particular area with digital detox, where we're becoming so connected to our devices that some of us are going a little too far, and we're becoming kind of entrenched with our devices, and we can't live our lives without our devices or being connected. 97% people have their smartphones, if they have a smartphone, they have their smartphones within reach, 3 feet or less, 97% of their day. That's a staggering statistic. What's that?
There will be a zombie apocalypse.
Yes, there will. And it'll be us. Yeah, question. Yeah.
Because they can do that everywhere else.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think the double screening is that I have the same opinion where we talk about the second screen overtaking the first. And if the first is the liturgy, the word, the community, and the congregation, if that becomes secondary,
Yeah.
where are we as a liturgical church?
Great question. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the idea, I think in our liturgy, we already have a second screen. We just don't position it that way. I mean, we have the sounds and the incense, and we have lots of things that are going on other than just the sermon, but we don't position it in a way. I mean, our liturgy is built in a way that engages all the senses. We just don't frame it in a way that this is a second screen experience without the screen.
Yeah. Let's go in the back.
Two things. The first is conversations about the second screening and whether or not they're appropriate in spaces. I think it's important for communities individually to discern wholly what their acceptable limits are. I find it really unacceptable for vestries to say no cell phones allowed. That's in consultation with people most likely to second screen. Second, if your preaching and liturgy are outstanding, people won't feel the need to distract themselves. So rather than banishing this little second screen, are there questions you might ask about how might we more fully engage the people who are already gathered? So that if you are smoking the place up, is it enough smoke to actually count? Or is it just paying homage to like we have a parable for the sake of having one? Are there opportunities to engage those facial expressions when you're looking at the back of each other's heads? So before we start at banning the second screens, how might we wonder what else we might do differently to better engage the community so that it's not bored and feeling the need to physically be present because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But then disconnect any way you can from doing a crossword to tweeting.
Well, I think that
Yeah.
Yo pienso que el problema es un problema de paradigma cultural.
I think that this is a paradigm shift, a culture paradigm shift.
Nosotros fuimos educados en la iglesia para recibir un mensaje unidireccional.
we were educated in a church in order to receive a one-way message.
Donde el sacerdote coloca la palabra y la comunidad simplemente la escucha.
Where the priest offers the word and the community simply hears.
Con la aparición de nuevas tecnologías
And with the advent of new technology
y el uso de una segunda pantalla,
and with the utilization of a second screen,
se rompe el paradigma
the paradigm then shifts.
y a veces nosotros entramos en crisis
Then we sometimes walk into a crisis
porque a veces pensamos que una cosa es lo sagrado, lo litúrgico,
because sometimes we have the idea that the liturgical and sacred aspects of things is one thing,
y otra cosa es lo profano,
and
el celular, el computador, etc.
anything else will be profane, meaning cell phones and any other technology.
Hoy día la comunicación se da en dos direcciones.
Today, in the present, communication is two-way communication.
Sería muy interesante abrir el paradigma
It would be quite interesting opening this paradigm
donde el sacerdote hace el sermón,
in a way where the priest could preach a sermon,
todos escuchamos el sermón,
all of us listen to the sermon,
pero al mismo tiempo podemos compartirnos las impresiones sobre ese sermón.
and at the same time share with each other our insights regarding that sermon.
Y así la palabra no queda resonando los 10 minutos del sermón,
And then the word is not just reverberating for 10 minutes after the sermon,
sino que puede quedar resonando muchísimo tiempo más
but it could reverberate for a much longer period of time.
y la comunidad puede continuar durante toda la semana haciendo una reflexión a partir de la palabra.
And the community could continue reflecting upon this word for a whole week.
Finalizo diciendo
And I will close by saying
que lo sagrado
that
o lo profano
that's sacred and profane
no es tanto cosa de Dios,
It's not so much an issue for God.
es más construcción humana.
It's more of a human construct.
Y este aparato
And this device
puede ser utilizado
could be utilized
para cosas profanas
for profanity
o para extender el reino de Dios.
or to build the kingdom of God.
Nailed it. Nailed it. I mean, I think that's it. I think that completely encapsulates in a very succinct way and where we're going and what we're discussing. Thank you for your insight. Spot on. Yeah.
I think that we have people who second screen now, in that you have people who are writing notes, they're taking notes, they may be even looking at their cell phone, but I mean, people have been second screening in sermons before this technology ever happened.
Yep.
We just don't view it that way because we don't think of people writing notes on their bulletins or kids writing notes on the cue cards as second screen.
Yeah.
But we've had it for years already.
Yeah. That is an excellent point, because technology, a lot of times people will want to blame the technology, but the behavior's been there,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's only that our technology is a little more visible. A glowing screen is more visible than a crossword puzzle, right? So yeah, absolutely. Good. This is great discussion, great dialogue. I switched ahead because I want to get here before our time closes. We have about 15 minutes left, and I think that, I left this towards the end, but I'm thinking more and more that this actually probably should have been the first new media value. And in fact, I made a note to myself last night to put this one first, because I think if nothing else, interactivity is good as number one, but sharing, I think, is better for some of the reasons that we're discussing here today. Especially because of Katie's comment about this is all happening in the relationship of, or context of relationship. Well, why are we in relationship? Well, we are in relationship to share, to know and to be known. That's why we enter into relationship with people. And so you can see here, dialogue is the new monologue. And this is, I think, perfectly what our friend articulated over here, where because of ubiquity, because of technology being all around us, church is becoming less of a possessor of knowledge as a commodity and more as a communal hub, where we can do things like saying, or at least think through the challenges of what it might mean to say, we're going to have a message, but through a Twitter back channel or whatever means of kind of connection you want to use, we're going to stay connected with one another all throughout the week. That's one of the reasons why I put the hashtag at the very beginning of talks like this, is because I watch that feed, and it helps me to know what's resonating with the group. In fact, the conversation Jake and I had this morning was kind of set off by something he had tweeted out yesterday, where we talked about if churches don't evolve, they will die. That seemed to really resonate with people as I looked through the Twitter feed. Well, that tells me something, and it allows us to kind of steer the direction in a different way, and it shows us what's important in the room right now, not in some theoretical kind of abstract way, but right now what matters to us. And when we approach sermons and messages that same way, I mean, look at our sanctuaries in our churches. They're not structured for dialogue at all. At least most of the churches that I'm in are not structured for dialogue. They're straightforward, look at the stage, they're structured for a one-way street. And I think out of necessity, you'll see a lot more churches adopt this model here than the pews and the rows of seats, because of this importance and this weight of dialogue being the new monologue. People are having their voice heard by national brands. When I can tweet Delta, I lost my iPad on a Delta flight about a year ago. And the first thing that I thought to do was to tweet them, was to say, I was on this flight, I left my iPad in the seat pocket in front of me, can you do anything to help? Do you know, within 45 minutes, I had that iPad back, all because I communicated with their Twitter team. That's the only way I connected. And now I've come to find out through talking with some of my other friends, like if you lose an iPad on an airplane, you will never see it again. It is gone. But the first thing that I did was say, Delta Assist, hey, this is the flight I was on, can you help me out? They found the plane, it was stationed away in the hangar. They had some poor, this was like 11 o'clock at night, so some poor, kind of bag person had to, drive their little cart over to where I was at, and they brought me the iPad, and there was much rejoicing. But, when we can have these experiences with national brands and have this sort of interaction, and it's not exactly in the same way we're talking about today, I think our churches ought to figure out ways to do that as well. And the good news is there are people out there who are experimenting and doing, implementing sort of kind of this dialogue approach. But I believe this is all kind of tied to something called informing. This is from Thomas L. Friedman. He wrote a book called The World is Flat. If you have not picked it up, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic read. It's really, I think, in-depth in looking at the issues that we're facing, and we have a lot to learn from it. But he calls this concept informing, and he ties it back to Google, Yahoo, MSN web search. So basically, informing is the ability to be your own self-directed and self-empowered researcher, editor, and selector of entertainment without having to go watch television or go to the library or the movie theater, into which I would add, or the church. So, I haven't quite formulated my entire thought process on this yet, but, we, like Luther took a commodity, and Scripture at that time was a commodity, and said, I'm going to put this in the hands of regular people. Most people couldn't read Scripture back then. It was in Latin. Only people who really knew how to read Latin were priests and wealthy individuals. And so he did this completely countercultural move. So I'm going to translate this, give this to people in a language they can actually understand. And if they can't understand it, at least reading it, they can at least hear it. And that completely shifted the power structure of the church. It wasn't Luther's intent, but that's what happened. Because he took that power out of the hands of the religious elite and put it into the hands of regular people. And I believe through informing, the same thing is happening. Only it's not as clear cut. When we can access sermons anywhere and any place that we want, from any church, mostly, that changes the relationship of a congregation with a pastor. It just does. And again, I don't necessarily have an answer around this, but I know that this is happening. And there's one church in Indiana that's actually taking a really unique stance on this. And this is a church called Granger Community Church. They're in Elkhart, Indiana. And as you'll notice from the page, this is a picture of their website. Their latest church plant, they did not call it a church. So it's not Granger Community Church. It's called Granger Commons. So they've completely eliminated the church language. And as you can imagine, it created quite a stir. But this little church is so culturally minded in the best way possible that they have spent a lot of time and effort digging into the needs of their community, saying, what do you need from a religious or spiritual kind of institution? And so one of the things that they have done is, again, in their branding, they've chosen to not use the word church. And some of the things that they offer, they have activities going in this particular building 7 days a week. And yes, one of them happens to be church services. But you may not be able to see this, but some of the things that they do there, they have a cafe, they have food that you can go, I don't know the exact schedule, but you can go there throughout the week, have a meal. There's a bookstore, there's a kids bookstore, there's like a coffee shop, there's a learning center, and then there is a church that you can attend if you'd like. There's a playground, a chapel, there's a village where people from the community can display their artwork. And so it's really become this communal center of living, and they've really tried to embrace church as a communal hub rather than a possessor of information or possessor of a commodity, that being knowledge. And the thought being, you must come to church to receive religious instruction so that you can go and be a Christian. And they've completely turned that model on its head because of things like online church, because of things like podcasts. these sorts of things. And so they've completely flipped the model. And yeah, question.
The model is an old one. Our cathedral is an example.
Yes.
We have a farmer's market, we have a lunchroom, we have a gift store, we have a place to worship. Oh, and it's busy every day, all day, place to read. I'm doing it.
Yep. Yes. This is not a. I mean, you read Acts, you read the early church, and these are the types of things that they're doing. They're serving meals. They're waiting on people. They're doing good, so to speak, within the community, and none of it really centers on a particular point in time, that being on the weekend service. Yeah, great points. I saw a hand up over here somewhere.
Well, I was just going to say the
Yeah.
same thing. I mean, we call it the church of the village green. I mean, the church is open every day of the week. We have a farmer's market. We have, there's something going on all the time. Bookshop, fruit, blah, blah, blah. We want people there, not just on Sundays. We want it to be their community.
There is nothing new under the sun. Isn't that right? Yeah.
But it's the branding. I mean, just the label makes the difference.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, that was one of the things that they discussed quite at length. Like, we're making a huge statement here by not having the word church in this plan. But it was intentional, because they had to discern that, hey, to our community, to our context, church, the connotation is very negative. And even if we have all these things, but people see the word church, they're not just going to come solely because of that word. So I think that's a, oh gosh, my goodness. That's a very valid point, and something to be considered in our context. There's one more point I want to get to, and then we're going to have to wrap things up. And this, I think, bookends what we've been discussing quite well, and that's the great flattening out. Through sharing, our kind of communal structures are flattening out. There's a fantastic thinker on this subject. His name's Gary Hamel. He has done a lot of work with churches in kind of reorganizing their structure. But he is a blogger for the Wall Street Journal and is a professor and is a very, very intelligent person. I've heard him speak a number of times. And he says the web is a post-bureaucratic structure. Churches need to be fervent and flexible communities, participatory and open source, much like the web. And he says that most organizations end up shackled to one business model, and when that model fails, the organization generally fails with it. He says to avoid entropy, so avoid kind of vanishing into the great beyond, he says do these things. Overcome temptation to take refuge in denial. Overcome temptation. This guy sits in front of like Fortune 50 companies and says these things with straight faces to CEOs and doesn't care. It's just like, listen, I got books, I got money, I don't care. You can take my advice or you don't have to. But this is a guy who knows how to structure organizations in a way that generates change and results. He says to overcome the temptation to take refuge in denial. In other words, what is it? Admitting you have a problem is the first step towards recovery. You could say that here. Admitting there's a problem is the first step to recovery. And he says generate more strategic options. In other words, we're not necessarily committing to a new model, but if we were to commit to a new model, what might that look like? What are some different options that we have? How can we change in a way that doesn't change what our message is, but changes how we broadcast that message, how we share that message? He says, deconstruct what you're already doing, look at everything. Leave no stone unturned, nothing. And this is where things get dicey. It's one thing to admit there's a problem. It's another thing to kind of daydream of a way forward. But when you start turning over every rock and looking at how is this hurting our mission? Where are we in denial? What needs to be done? When you lance the boil, so to speak, that's when things can get challenging. But he says the last thing is, and he wraps all these three kind of commandments, I guess you could say, in this. He says, change is not possible. Change is not possible with a top-down autocratic leadership structure. He says it's not possible. Change will not happen. These things cannot take place if these things aren't addressed. He says we must, this is a quote from Bill Gore, who's the founder of Gore Industries, which makes Gore-Tex. He says, we must create an organization where people innovate all the time and fight bureaucracy none of the time. Can I get an amen? So in Gore-Tex, of course, if you know this company, no one there has titles, which is just wild. Nobody has a job title. There are certain leaders in departments, but no one has a job title. And so make changes there, it happens incredibly quick. You know, like we saw in the Oreo example. People at Gore-Tex are able to make changes very, very quickly. You know, you see this at Enterprise, the rental car company. Up to a certain amount, and I don't know what it is, I don't know what their dollar amount is, but anybody on staff at Enterprise can make it right. That's kind of their tagline internally. You don't need to go to a manager or a manager's manager or manager's manager's manager. Employees, regardless of where they're at on the food chain, so to speak, can make it right. So if you have a bad experience or, you know, for whatever reason your car didn't show up, those people can make it right. They're automatically, you know, they've just been assigned to say, do what it's right, up to a certain dollar amount. Last thing I want to share with you is another quote from Gary. He says, the Facebook generation does not want to go to a church that feels like a corporation. They want a flexible community that has a cause they can organically help create. Natural hierarchies exist based on value-added systems. If something has value, it will continue, he says. I don't know about you, but when I hear this, it is like balm to a parched, dry soul, or water to a parched, dry soul. It is very refreshing to hear this point of view. And Gary has this mindset because he comes from an organizational background, a corporate background. And I'm going to breeze through this here. This is way more in depth than I'm going to give it credit for. But the church is three things. It's a corporation, it's a community, and it's a cause. It's a corporation from the perspective that you know, there's money and buildings and staff that make up a church's corporate kind of element. To deny that, you know, a church needs to set a budget and meet that budget is living in fantasy world. In that sense, you know, there's a structure to a church kind of leadership team. And we need to acknowledge that, and that's a purpose and a function of a church. Church is also a community. So it's not about the types of meetings or activities, but it's about connecting in personal ways with those people that you worship. So it's a community in the sense that we are all in this corporation together. We're all in this community together. We share a shared purpose. We have a common unity. And this kind of makes up our identity, the things that we share and we all care about. And lastly, the church is a cause. And that cause, of course, is the kingdom of God, building the kingdom of God here on earth. We're to see God's rule impact the planet, and this is ultimately what we're all about. And what's interesting is that churches are inherently cause-based. But what you see now is this really interesting shift. Corporations are becoming cause-based. And organizations like the church are becoming corporately based. And we see this, you know, in the CEO model and even the church I was at Hope. The model is going through some really big stress growing pains right now because it has been that top-down leadership and it's just not working anymore. And so for the last, 20, 25 years, we've had this corporate mentality, taking, titles from corporate America and slapping them on senior pastors. And that model is just not working very well anymore. And so Gary says our goal is to become more of a cause that's founded in community, but also has the structure and just the realities of living every day today as a corporation. That's just a reality that we deal with. So I'm going to flip ahead here. We don't have time to go through all this. I do want to give you some contact information. This page is up. It has all the resources that we've talked about today and the last couple days together, justinwise.net/Episcopal. So if you go there, you can download the notes, look at the video we took a look at yesterday, and there's a couple links of some of the things that I'm involved in and ways we can stay connected. Of course, you can always hit me up on Twitter @JustinWise. You guys have been amazing. Please feel free to contact me, and we'll see you online.
Justin, thank you very much.